Chapter 6. Good and Evil. What is good and evil? Was it a law left by the Creator or a system implanted by man himself over time? Answering these questions means, first of all, dissecting the human being, both in his physical as well as in the spiritual aspect that he lived yesterday, he lives today and will live tomorrow. Here the events in time did not cause interruptions, but constitute only and only small stops and subsequent restarts. Life and everything else that exists follows the principle of duality. For cold we have as opposite heat, high, low, far, near and so on. For good to exist, evil must exist. One does not exist without the other, just as light does not exist without darkness, for one gives existence to the other. Let us begin with good. What is good? Is that what we learn from other people, from our parents, from our friends, or from our teachers? But who taught them what is good? Were their parents, their teachers, or their friends? And who taught them the concept of good? In the same way, we can reason about the concept of evil. At this point we return to the question, would it be a law left by the Creator? If true the affirmation, why good and evil often change from face to face when crossing a simple border of a country? Would the Creator have conceptualized good for one people and for another would this same good be evil? Within this logic we understand that good and evil are not parts of the work of the Creator. But if it was not from the Creator, where is the origin of the concept of good and evil? Good and evil constitute a system within another larger system. Good and evil were being engendered by organizations throughout the history of man. This system has had, over time, its adaptations, its improvements, in an attempt to accompany the physical and mental improvement of the man. In this process of adaptation through the ages, each nation or region of the earth has given a feature of its system good and evil. So many things that are considered good in one country, in another can be seen as evil and vice versa. One fact may be good for one man and for another may be evil. In one country a man who kills another man can be condemned, but if the fact happens in a war he can be glorified. Within what has been mentioned, good can be collective, individual, permanent, temporary, physical, spiritual and others. We realize therefore that the concept of good can be as elastic as our own imagination. But what about evil? Is it all that often contrasts with good? But does not one's own good often oppose the good of another? From this we can conclude that good often confuses itself with evil, depending only on the angle that the question is analyzed. If we look closely at good and evil we will see that they are like the scales plates that intend to measure the acts of the human being. In the middle, equidistant from the plates is the scales axis that we can call here human consciousness. If the person is unconscious, as is the case of the inhabitants of the earth, he will be guided by the movement of the plates and not by the observation of the scales axis. If the weight is heavier on the left side and the plate goes down, the person thinks he is on the dark side of life. Thus acting, and using this reference, taught to him by other people or groups, he will soon feel the pain of guilt for being on the side of evil. On the contrary, if the scales plate descends to the right side, the side of good, then he will feel fortunate to be on the side of good and, in his thoughts, will often appear the images of the distant paradise. Now imagine that the person in question was aware and was not using a body with the blockages and energy imbalances, like the ones we use today. How he would see the scale and its plates. Would he be guided by the movement of the plates or would he only see them as instruments? It would be more appropriate to say that he would be guided by the scales axis, which in this case is his awakened consciousness, and would despise the plates filled with erroneous concepts that are subject to the actions of time, space and human conveniences. Good and evil system was created for the purpose of limiting and directing man's behavior while unconscious. It is quite true that it was and will be for a long time useful, but neither can we confuse the real with the unreal, the shadow with the light. Good and evil only exist as a byproduct of human unconsciousness. Therefore they have no real existence without their unconscious mother, who gave birth to them, gave them life, nourished them and made them executioners and judges of the human being. Man must understand the system good and evil, live in it but not accept it as an eternal reality that exists in all worlds, applicable to all human beings. This mechanism was one of the crutches created so that man can walk and reach the present day, even walking through the darkness without knowing where he came from or where he was going. The human being, when created, brings inside itself an indelible record that makes it possessor of the Creator's will. The divine creature, which we all are, was created perfect and there is no need for repair. Even if there were this real need, only the Creator would be able to detect it. Man, in his original condition of consciousness full, does not require the system of good and evil or any of the other systems that were deployed on earth, nor does he need written or spoken laws to control his actions in the social environment. In this state of full consciousness always remains the principle of full understanding of everything that surrounds the person. In addition, he has in-depth knowledge of the physical body he inhabits and of his inner world. At this point the question is, where is the great wall that separates the conscious man from the unconscious one? Wall that created the man who suffers and who cries, who hurts and who kills his fellow man, who sleeps the great sleep of the incarnation and does not remember who he was yesterday. Barrier that created a new man to live in the past or the future but never in the present. This wall of colossal dimension is formed by the blockings of the human physical body. It is responsible for all the causes of human suffering. It separates this suffering man from that other who is free, who does not suffer, who lives the past and the future in the present and who deeply loves his fellow man. Thus good and evil system was created for a moment of humanity. And this system only applies to the unconscious man created by the wall. For the self-conscious man this system is innocuous and has no use. It is like trying to lighten the day, lighting candles in the sunlight. Related topics. 1. Are spirits good or bad by nature? Or are they the same spirits made better through their own efforts? Spirit's book. The same spirits made better through their own efforts. In growing better they pass from a lower to a higher order. Comment. Spirits are created perfect, neither good nor bad. 2. Are some spirits created good and others created bad? Spirit's book. God has created all spirits in a state of simplicity and ignorance, that is to say, without knowledge. Spirits acquire knowledge by passing through the trials imposed on them by God. Comment. Assuming that the concepts of good and evil have human origin and are extremely relative, we understand that the Creator, in the supreme act of creation, would be far from this division dictated by men. The paths that people seek for their experiences are dictated by their free will and not by trials. 3. According to this statement, it would appear that spirits, in their origin, are like children, ignorant and without experience, but acquiring, little by little, the knowledge which they lack, by passing through the different phases of human life. Spirit's book. Yes, the comparison is correct. The child, if rebellious, remains ignorant and faulty, he profits more or less according to his docility. But the life of man has a term, whereas that of spirits stretches out into infinity. Comment. First, the children are not ignorant and inexperienced, but they are only physical bodies in formation and whose occupant has not yet taken control of the physical organization. On the other hand, we repeat, spirits are created perfect and endowed with the records of their time. They have, as perfect creatures within creation, all the capacities to assimilate knowledge and distinguish, among various paths, what best suits them to achieve their goals. 4. Do any spirits remain forever in the lower ranks? Spirit's book. No, all become perfect. Comment. There are no lower ranks, all are perfect, and if they are perfect, some cannot be inferior to others. There are, rather, different experiences experienced by one and the other. Is it possible for a father to claim that one of his children is inferior to the other? Or is it more appropriate for him to state that one of his children has individual characteristics different from the other? 5. Does it depend on the spirits themselves to hasten their progress towards perfection? Spirit's book. Certainly, They reach the goal more or less quickly according to the strength of their desire and the degree of their submission to the will of God. Comment: that's right. It is like the traveler who is most dedicated to his journey, the faster he will reach his goal. But on the other hand, we must ask, what is perfection? A stone is perfect. Is a tree, a flower, an animal also perfect? We understand that, yes, so we can conclude that we are surrounded by the perfections of the Creator. But what about this other perfection to which the question refers? Well, this human perfection is an ideal that will always be pursued by the human being. 6. Could God exonerate spirits from the trials which they have to undergo in order to reach their highest rank? Spirit's book. If they had been created perfect, they would not have merited the enjoyment of the benefits of that perfection. Comment: we always start from the basic assumption that the human being was created perfect, and the so-called trials are only an attempt by man himself to explain the different experiences lived by each other in the physical body. If these trials really existed, the people born in poor countries would always be on probation, while in rich countries we would rarely find someone on probation. As for the classification of the spirits into orders, we never hear of its existence in the spiritual dimension. We believe it was a mechanism created here in an attempt to explain the spiritual world. 7. Do all spirits pass by the road of evil to arrive at good? Spirit's book. Not by the road of evil, but by that of ignorance. Comment: the spirits are not destined to the ranks of evil nor the ones of good, because both are only human concepts and not realities originating from the Creator. 8. How can spirits, at their origin, when they have not yet acquired self-consciousness, possess freedom of choice between good and evil? Is there in them any principle, any tendency, which inclines them towards either road rather than towards the other? SP. Free will is developed in proportion as the spirit acquires the consciousness of himself. Freedom would not exist for the spirit if his choice were solicited by a cause independent of his will. Comment: spirits do not follow the path of good and evil, but they live experiences in the physical environment that will be influenced by several factors, such as environment, reincarnation, customs, social condition and others. 9. Whence come the influences that act upon spirits? SP. From the imperfect spirits, who seek to take possession of him and to dominate him, and who are happy to see him succumb. It is this temptation that is allegorically pictured as Satan. Comment: communication among spirits even at different frequencies is possible and occurs. We cannot, however, attribute the changes in behavior and acts of people only to spiritual influences. These influences, when they exist, have their roots in the person incarnate. 10. Why has God permitted it to be possible for spirits to take the wrong road? Spirit's book. The wisdom of God is shown in the freedom of choice which He leaves to every spirit, for each has thus the merit of his deeds. Comment: if you do not taste the salt, you will not know the taste of the sweet. If you do not walk barefoot on the boulders, you will not know the value of the rustic slipper. In this way, everything is experience, everything is learning. 11. Since there are spirits who, from the beginning, follow unswervingly the right path, and others who wander into the lowest depths of evil, there are, no doubt, many degrees of deviation between these two extremes. Spirit's book. Yes, certainly, and these degrees constitute the paths of the great majority of spirits. Comment: how can we know that the spirit has from the beginning followed the path of evil or absolute good? Earlier we have already commented that good and evil are extremely relative concepts and therefore difficult to assimilate by man in his state of unconsciousness. Thus, it is very reckless to say that someone follows the path of good or evil. For this we would have to know even his life purpose, and this only he knows and possesses in his records. 12. Will the spirits who have chosen the wrong road be able to reach the same degree of elevation as the others? Spirit's book. Yes, but the eternities will be longer in their case. This expression, the eternities, must be understood as referring to the belief of spirits of inferior degree in the perpetuity their sufferings, resulting from the fact that it is not given to them to foresee the termination of those sufferings. Comment: there are no paths of evil and paths of good, but lived experiences of different colorations that gradually work on the state of consciousness of the incarnated human being. 13. Are spirits who have reached the supreme degree after wandering into the wrong road less meritorious than the others in the sight of God? Spirit's Book. God regards the wanderers who have returned to the right road with the same approval and the same affection as the others. They have been classed, for a time, as evil spirits, because they succumbed to the temptation of evil, but, before their fall, they were merely neutral in regard to good and evil, like all other spirits. Comment: if this supreme degree exists, it must be the supreme perfection. But this perfection must exist only as an ideal to be attained, for as spiritual growth is infinite, the spirits who were there would be doomed to infinite stagnation. 14. Whence has man his moral qualities, good or bad? Spirit's Book. They are those of the spirit who is incarnated in him. The purer is that spirit, the more decidedly is the man inclined to goodness. Comment: the man in his state of unconsciousness has in his inner world a sum of experiences lived in many lives. Many of them are more striking than others, bringing their reflections to the present. Based on these reflexes of the past, the physical body will also dictate its norms. The individual, in this way, will have his behavior still influenced by the environment, customs, family and other factors. 15. It would seem, then, that a good man is the incarnation of a good spirit, and a vicious man that of a bad spirit? Spirit's Book. Yes, but you should rather say of an imperfect spirit, otherwise it might be supposed that there are spirits who will always remain bad, what you call devils. Comment: for us there are no imperfect spirits, but rather imperfect physical bodies. Thus, a man who is addicted tends to fulfill the desire of his body, since he is commanded and does not command. The so-called addictions almost always pass from father to son in the form of a record. The classification given to men of good and evil should be given by the way of the body that he uses and not to the spirit itself, since the body of man is the main responsible for the conduct of the human being. It is similar to a rider who cannot control his animal and gives rise to various types of accidents. 16. What definition can be given of the moral law? Spirit's Book. The moral law is the rule for acting aright, that is to say, for distinguishing practically between good and evil. It is founded on the observance of the law of God. Man acts rightly when he takes the good of all as his aim and rule of action, for he then obeys the law of God. Comment: within the created system, morality is the vehicle that intends to lead man to the path of good. It, like good and evil, is a rule of conduct created over time to limit man's freedom and direct his steps. It is extremely relative and changes according to one region from the same country or even one social stratum to another. Therefore, morality is based rather on the convenience of men than on laws of the Creator. 17. How can we distinguish between good and evil? Spirit's Book. Good is whatever is in conformity with the law of God, and evil is whatever deviates from it. Thus, to do right, is to conform to the law of God, to do wrong, is to infringe that law. Comment: the human being often finds it difficult to distinguish between good and evil. He practices one with the intention of practicing the other. This is due to the relativity that exists between both. The greatest difficulty of assimilation of the concept of good and evil lies in the differentiated understanding of people. This understanding is provided by the number of brain impulses and frequency. Both vary from one physical body to another. So we see that the understanding vary from person to person. The concept good and evil will have a different color for each individual. 18. Has man of himself the means of distinguishing what is good from what is evil? Spirit's Book. Yes, when he believes in God, and desires to do what is right, God has given him intelligence in order that he may distinguish between them. Comment: the only way man can understand the system of good and evil is by improving his understanding, otherwise he is following others without knowing if they are in the way that suits them best. 19. Why does evil exist in the nature of things? I speak of moral evil. Could not God have created the human race in more favorable conditions? Spirit's book. We have already told you that spirits are created simple and ignorant. God leaves man free to choose his road, so much the worse for him if he takes the wrong one. His pilgrimage will be all the longer. Comment. Evil is not found in the nature of things, but it was engendered by man himself because he did not understand the reality that surrounds him, but also because he did not differentiate what the human being is and what is part of his physical body. 20. When a savage, yielding to his instinctive desire, feeds on human flesh, is he guilty in so doing? Spirit's book. I have said that the essence of evil is in the will, therefore man is more or less guilty according to his light. Comment. Where there is unconsciousness there can be no guilt. Even where there is conscience there is no guilt but responsibility. 21. The custom of offering human sacrifices dates from the remotest antiquity. How can mankind have been led to believe that such an enormity could be pleasing to God? Spirit's book. In the first place, through their not having comprehended God as being the source of all goodness. Among primitive peoples, matter predominates over spirit. Their moral qualities not being yet developed, they give themselves up to the instincts of brutality. Comment. That is what we have stated. Good and evil are relative concepts and man is often mistaken in the application of one or the other. This is the case of human sacrifices that seek, in short, the graces of God, a good, using a practice that is reprehensible. 22. What should be thought of the war-styled religious? The sentiment that induces a nation of fanatics to exterminate the greatest possible number of those who do not share their belief, with a view to rendering themselves acceptable to God, would seem to proceed from the same source as that which formerly led them to immolate their fellow creatures as sacrifices. Spirit's book. Such wars are stirred up by evil spirits, and the men who wage them place themselves in direct opposition to the will of God, which is, that each man should love his brother as himself. Since all religions, or rather all peoples, worship the same God, whatever the name by which they call him, why should one of them wage a war of extermination against another, simply because its religion is different, or has not yet reached the degree of enlightenment arrived at by the aggressor? Comment. It is the reign of human unconsciousness, to the point of decreeing the liquidation of entire nations in the name of God just and good. In fact, today, similar facts are practiced by worshippers of God, but they hate men, forgetting that the Creator and the creature are one and it is not possible to love one without loving the other. 23. Are the human laws and customs that have been established for the purpose of placing obstacles in the way of reproduction contrary to the laws of nature? Spirit's book. Whatever hinders the operations of nature is contrary to the general law. Comment. The human being when incarnated has no obligation to reproduce other physical bodies. Many people even lived many lives without bearing children. Therefore, we must remember that the human body has an owner and it is up to him to decide whether or not to submit it to reproduction. This principle differentiates us from the animal whose automatism of nature always follows its course. On the other hand, if the incarnated human person remains passively and does not make use of his ability to decide, then the automatism of the body will also, in this case, follow its course. 24. What is to be thought of usages intended to arrest reproduction in the interest of sensuality? Spirit's book. They prove the predominance of the body over the soul and show how deeply man has plunged himself in matter. Comment. One of the biggest problems that Earth's inhabitants have to solve is that of sex. It is the most used force center and therefore the strongest. The sensuality is characteristic of the human being who was already created with it and did not subsequently acquire it in contact with the body. But in reincarnating and assuming a body in a state of imbalance, this force is also subjected to the same unbalancing process. 25. Is marriage, that is to say, the permanent union of two beings, Contrary to the law of nature, Spirit's book, it is a progress arrived at by the human race. Comment. Another big problem to be solved by the human being is that of the children. Marriage was a system created in the past to protect offspring. Prior to the marriage event, human reproduction suffered from difficulties because factors such as safety, food, and all other child care were left to the mother, who alone had no means of performing the task. The way was to connect the man to the woman and form the family group. The process worked in the early days, but today it is in a state of bankruptcy, and the proof of this is the thousands of children abandoned and without means of subsistence. We must remember, however, that it was a system created for an emergency moment, right after the big accident, not meaning that it is the best or that there are no others. 26. What would be the effect, upon human society, of the abolition of marriage? Spirit's book, A Return to the Life of the Beasts. Comment. Marriage is a contract and as such can be changed, in form and in essence. It can be transformed into a verbal pact, or take other forms. The legal regime itself already adapts to this new reality of informal cohabitation, offering the support of the law to children and women. Therefore, marriage in the old ways is an institution that remains more for the tradition than for the utility that it represents of protection to the children. For the primary purpose for which it was created, little utility has, since the number of cases in which one of the spouses leaves the society is immense. Thus the number of children abandoned by their parents or presenting themselves without known parents is also immense, so the marriage has lost its primary purpose, which is the protection of the offspring. In these terms, and in reference to the reality of facts rather than to theory, one concludes that marriage remains more because of attachment to ritual, custom and tradition than to actual necessity. In fact, what is lacking is a higher level of understanding of man, so that he realizes that without the child there is no future. In this way, every investment must first aim at the child, since every child that is born is the future that springs in the present. 27. Is polygamy or monogamy most in conformity with the law of nature? Spirit's book. Polygamy is a human institution, the abolition of which marks an era of social progress. Marriage, according to the intention of God, should be founded on the affection of the beings who enter into it. In polygamy there is no real affection, there is only sensuality. Comment. Polygamy, and neither monogamy, belong to the natural law that exists in us as a record, from the creation. Both are human creations in an attempt to organize the chaos that settled among the inhabitants of Earth after the big accident. One day, when man achieves his self-consciousness, all customs, traditions and laws contrary to our internal records left by the Creator will be banished from the planet, and the Earth will then move on to true progress. 28. Why has God attached an attraction to the enjoyment of material things? Spirit's book. In order, first, to excite man to the accomplishment of his mission, and next, to try him by temptation. Comment. All attractive materials are the work of the Creator. The human being was not created for suffering, which should be classified as an anomaly, a special kind of disease of the man of the present. The contrary is true. Our journey must be full of satisfaction, joy and pleasure, because we are divine creatures, children of the Great Father. 29. What is the aim of God in visiting mankind with destructive calamities? Spirit's book. To make men advance more quickly. Have we not told you that destruction is necessary to the moral regeneration of spirits, who accomplish a new step of their purification in each new existence? Comment. Catastrophes are usually natural, that is, those that occur spontaneously, without human intervention, but can also be man-made. Man causes unbalance over nature because he acts unconsciously on it. On the other hand, the Creator never sends scourges to punish man in order to bring him to perfection. A perfection achieved at the expense of pain and suffering would be an imperfect perfection. 30. Some persons have inferred, from the abandonment of the young of animals by their parents, that the ties of family, among mankind, are merely a result of social customs, and not a law of nature. What is to be thought of this inference? Spirit's book. Man has another destiny than of the animals. Why, then, should you always be trying to assimilate him to them? There is, in man, something more than physical wants. There is the necessity of progressing. Social ties are necessary to progress, and social ties are drawn closer by family ties. For this reason, family ties are a law of nature. God has willed that men should learn, through them, to love one another as brothers. Comment. The great difference between man and the irrational animal is that within the material man there is the eternal human being who can see, feel, reason and learn, and even plan his future. The fellow creature, for the conscious man, is always loved and recognized as a brother. 31. Man's perversity is very great. Does he not seem to be going back instead of advancing, at least, as regards morality? Spirit's book. You are mistaken. Look at the human race as a whole, and you will see that it is advancing, for it has arrived at a clearer perception of what is evil, and every day witnesses the reform of some abuse. Comment. The human being does not really retreat, but your physical body on the other hand may still be unbalanced more than the state in which it presents itself. This state can be observed in our day when man becomes increasingly angry and aggressive. In fact, it is not the spirit that is angry and aggressive, but the body that he uses. In many cases the imbalance of the physical body is so great that its owner totally loses control over it. In these cases anything can happen. 32. There are persons who escape one danger only to fall into another. It seems as though it had been impossible for them to escape death. Is there not a fatality in such cases? Spirit's book. There is nothing fatal, in the true meaning of the word, but the time of death. When that time has come, no matter under what form death presents itself, you cannot escape it. Comment. Fatality really does not exist. Not even death has its definite moment to occur. If this were true, it would be more practical, as most people understand, to sit comfortably and wait until death comes. With regard to old age, it is a curable disease and therefore, death for this cause may cease to exist in the form and time we know it. Deaths by accident or provocation do not have time to happen, occurred by an action, omission, negligence or fortuitous event. 33. If so, whatever danger may seem to threaten us, we shall not die if our hour has not come. Spirit's book. No, you will not be allowed to die, and of this you have thousands of examples, but when your hour has come, nothing can save you. God knows beforehand the manner in which each of you will quit your present life, and this is often known also to your spirit, for it is revealed to you when you make choice of such and such existence. Comment. The loss of the physical body by accidental or provoked death can happen at any time. It is up to every person to use prudence. 34. What is the aim of Providence in making us incur dangers that are to be without result? Spirit's book. When your life is imperiled, it is a warning which you yourself have desired, in order to turn you from evil, and to make you better. Comment. Man in his unconsciousness has the custom of attributing to God everything that happens in material life. The dangers that we go through in our material lives are proper to the conditions of the terrestrial environment. Human being through reasoning and discernment can, by itself, get rid of most of the dangers. On the other hand, it is not logical for the human being to desire dangers for himself as a warning against evil and to become better. 35. Does a spirit know beforehand the kind of death to which he will succumb in the earthly life? Spirit's book. He knows that he has exposed himself by the life he has chosen to die in some particular manner rather than in another, but he also foresees the efforts he will have to make in order to avoid the danger, and he knows that, if God so permit, he will escape it. Comment. As stated earlier, incarnate spirit has no set date to leave the physical body. An accident can occur under any circumstances and at any time. We must always be careful. The death by exhaustion of the physical organization also has neither day nor hour to happen, because the old age is located in the field of the pathology and as such can be cured. 36. Are there incidents which must necessarily occur in a life, and that spirits will not avert? Spirit's book. Yes, but those incidents you, in your spirit state, foresaw when you made your choice. But, nevertheless, you must not suppose that everything which happens to you is written, as people express it. Comment. There are certain events necessary for the incarnate person that are anticipated in advance so that he can experience them. As an example, we can mention the cases in which the human being acquired deep traumas in past lives and whose right medicine is repetition therapy. In other words, traumatic events occurring in other physical bodies, that is, when the person was incarnate, can only be healed by the repetition, in another or in other lives, of all the factors that gave rise to those traumas. Thus, experiencing similar facts under the same conditions gives the understanding and the acceptance. This determines the disappearance of the trauma. It is important not to confuse this therapy of repetition with the figure of karma whose contours we have already established previously. In this case, which we are now dealing with, there is no need to speak about guilt, debt and redemptions, but to repeat an experience for a second or third time to seek understanding and not to make a payment by the pain and suffering check. 37. What is the most efficacious means of combating the predominance of the corporeal nature? Spirit's book. The practice of abnegation. Comment. Achieve self-consciousness. Man, while remaining in the present state of unconsciousness, will not have the mastery of his physical body but, on the contrary, will always be dominated by the body. A long time ago man was conscious and inhabited the physical body. There was the great dip in the night of unconsciousness. He slept sir and woke up slave. 38. Whence comes the belief in future rewards and punishments which is found among all nations? Spirit's book. It is a presentiment of the reality imparted to each man by the Spirit incarnated in him. Comment. The teachings, especially the religious ones, are crystallized in the mind through the technique of repetition and end up being indelible records that last even the future lives. These records can only be changed by altering brain energy and the consequent arrival of new understanding. 39. Is there anything of materiality in the joys and sorrows of the soul after death? Spirit's book. Common sense tells you that they cannot be of a material nature, because the soul is not matter. There is nothing carnal in those joys and sorrows, and yet they are 1,000 times more vivid than those you experience upon the earth, because the spirit when freed from matter is more impressionable. Matter deadens its sensibility. Comment. The punishments and joys of the soul, purgatory, heaven, hell and paradise, all constitute a pedagogical system to teach the unconscious man the middle way, the path of balance, restraining his material instincts without control. We have already affirmed that in the state of unconsciousness, the human being does not command, but rather, is commanded.